Today is day 26 of the war, and if you want to understand what is actually happening right now, you need to hold two things in your mind at the same time. First, Trump is claiming the war is essentially won and that peace talks with Iran are underway. Second, Iran fired 9 separate waves of missiles at Israel overnight. One struck a residential street in Bnei Brak, east of Tel Aviv. Another hit a Bedouin community in southern Israel. Emergency sirens sounded in Dimona, the southern city near Israel's nuclear research center, for the third time this week, and the Pentagon is simultaneously deploying 1,000 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division to the Middle East. Let me say that again. Peace talks are claimed to be underway, and the 82nd Airborne is being sent to the region. Those two things are happening on the same day. That tension is not accidental. That tension is the story. Start with what Trump actually said on Tuesday and what it reveals about the internal state of the administration. In the Oval Office on March 24th, Trump told reporters that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was quite disappointed by the prospect of negotiations to end the war. He named Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Dan Kane as the only two officials who were reluctant to pursue a ceasefire. Then he praised them for it. Pete didn't want it to be settled, Trump said, describing both men's reluctance as proof of their toughness. That statement is worth examining carefully because it tells you something specific about the internal split within the Trump administration. The president is signaling publicly that he wants a deal. His own defense secretary does not. In any normal administration, that gap would be managed quietly. Trump put it on the record in the Oval Office on live television, and then praised the person who disagrees with him. That is not how you build a unified negotiating position. That is how you signal to Iran that your diplomatic overtures have opponents at the highest level of your own war machine. Iran noticed. An Iranian military spokesperson mocked U.S. ceasefire efforts on Wednesday, saying the Americans were only negotiating with themselves. That is a pointed line, and it was delivered the same morning that 9 missile waves hit Israeli cities. Now let us look at the Pakistan dimension, because it is the single most consequential diplomatic development happening right now, and it is being significantly underreported. According to Al Jazeera sources confirmed on March 25th, Pakistan has physically delivered the U.S. 15-point ceasefire framework to Iran and is awaiting a response. This is not back-channel messaging. This is an official transmission of terms. The framework, as reported by multiple outlets including Axios and CNN, includes a 5-year halt to Iran's ballistic missile program, zero uranium enrichment, full decommissioning of the Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo nuclear sites, strict external inspection protocols, an end to Iranian financing of regional armed groups, and the full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif posted publicly on X that his country stands ready to host direct talks between U.S. and Iranian officials. President Trump reshared that post on Truth Social without comment, which in Trump's communication style is an implicit endorsement. CNN reported that a face-to-face meeting in Islamabad could be held within days, with the possibility that Vice President J.D. Vance would attend as the American representative. And that Vance detail matters enormously, because according to 2 regional sources who spoke to CNN, Iran has explicitly signaled that it does not want to continue engaging with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. The Iranians are requesting to negotiate with Vance instead. That is not a minor protocol preference. That is a strategic demand. Witkoff is a real estate developer with no diplomatic background. Kushner is the president's son-in-law. Neither has formal government authority. By requesting Vance, the Vice President of the United States, the second highest constitutional officer in the country, Iran is demanding a counterpart with actual governmental standing, someone who cannot be disavowed later as an informal envoy. Iran wants whoever sits across the table to be someone whose commitments bind the United States government. That is a sophisticated negotiating position. And it tells you that Iran, whatever its public posture of no talks, is thinking very carefully about the structure of any eventual settlement. Meanwhile, the battlefield has not paused for the diplomacy. In Shiraz, a historic Iranian city with one of the most significant archaeological and cultural profiles in the entire country, U.S. and Israeli strikes hit the residential Zibashar district on Wednesday morning, killing at least 20 civilians, according to Iran's semi-official Mehr news agency. Shiraz is not a military target. It is the city of Hafez and Saadi, two of Persian literature's most celebrated poets. It is home to the Persepolis ruins, a UNESCO site. The strike on Shiraz civilian areas will generate significant international condemnation and will make any diplomatic settlement more politically difficult for Iranian leadership to sell domestically. Also, on Wednesday, the Israeli Air Force struck what it called two key naval cruise missile production sites in Tehran. Israel hit fuel stations across Lebanon, which the IDF described as cutting off Hezbollah's logistics chain from north to south. In Nabatea, 3 people were killed and 18 wounded. In Sidon, 6 dead. In Tyre, 29 injured. A strike on a residential apartment building southeast of Beirut killed at least 2 people. The Lebanon front is escalating in a direction that deserves specific attention today. Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, has announced that Israel will establish a permanent security zone inside Lebanese territory south of the Litani River, that is 10 to 20 miles inside Lebanese soil, territory Lebanon considers sovereign and the 2024 ceasefire agreement treated as inviolable. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich went further, saying on Israeli radio that the new Israeli border must be the Litani. That statement, made on Tuesday and not walked back, represents the first explicit public claim to Lebanese territory by a sitting Israeli government minister. The Lebanese government's response was equally significant. On Tuesday, Lebanon's foreign ministry expelled Iran's newly appointed ambassador, declaring him persona non grata and ordering him to leave by Sunday. Lebanon's foreign minister cited Iranian operations on Lebanese soil alongside Hezbollah as a destabilizing force that is dragging Lebanon into a war it did not choose. Hezbollah responded by calling the expulsion a national and strategic sin and demanding the Lebanese president and prime minister reverse it immediately. That public pressure on the Lebanese government from Hezbollah reveals the internal fracture inside Lebanon, a country that is simultaneously hosting a militant group that takes orders from Tehran and a government that is actively trying to distance itself from that same Tehran. One detail from Wednesday that should have been a major headline but wasn't. Israel and the U.S. reportedly granted temporary diplomatic immunity to 2 specific Iranian officials, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, for the duration of the 5-day negotiation window. This was reported by Israel's Channel 14. Israel's defense minister had previously stated publicly that any Iranian regime leader was a legitimate military target. Granting immunity to Araghchi and Ghalibaf specifically signals that these are the 2 figures Washington and Tel Aviv believe are the most likely Iranian interlocutors for any deal. It also explains why Iran's official denial of talks from Ghalibaf was so carefully worded. He did not say no talks would ever happen. He said no talks had happened yet. Now, for the global dimension, because on day 26, the war is no longer just a Middle East story. The Philippines declared a state of national energy emergency on Tuesday. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. said there was an imminent danger to the country's energy stability and supply. The declaration, valid for 1 year, was issued in direct response to the Strait of Hormuz closure and its effect on fuel prices and supply chains. The Philippines is a U.S. treaty ally. It is not adjacent to the Middle East. Its declaration of a national emergency because of this war tells you something precise about the geographic spread of economic damage. Japan announced on Wednesday that it will begin releasing 30 days' worth of oil from its state reserves, part of a broader plan to release 45 days total, its largest strategic reserve release in history. Japan imports over 90% of its crude oil from the Middle East. The government has avoided strict rationing mandates so far, but warned against panic buying, which itself is a signal of how close to the edge Japan's energy situation currently is. Sri Lanka ordered streetlights, neon signs, and billboard lighting turned off as part of mandatory measures to cut energy consumption by 25%. The International Energy Agency, which has now characterized this conflict as the greatest global energy and food security challenge in history, reported that at least 40 energy facilities across 9 countries have been severely damaged. LNG spot prices in Asia more than doubled to 3-year highs as early as March 4th after Qatar Energy declared force majeure at its Ras Laffan LNG plant, which accounts for 20% of global LNG production. And on Wednesday, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi posted publicly on X calling for the Strait of Hormuz to remain open, secure, and accessible. India relies on the Gulf for nearly 60% of its petroleum imports and for over $125 billion in annual remittances from its diaspora working in the region. India is also the world's largest rice exporter, and its fertilizer supply, over 40% of which comes from the Gulf, is now disrupted. A food price shock from this war is not a secondary possibility. It is actively unfolding. The detail from Wednesday that arguably carries the longest strategic shadow, however, is not a missile or a diplomatic meeting. It is a speech from Pyongyang. North Korea's Kim Jong-un, addressing the Supreme People's Assembly on Tuesday, stated that the U.S. war with Iran proves North Korea made the correct decision in developing and keeping its nuclear arsenal. His exact framing, according to CNN reporting, was that Washington's actions demonstrated acts of state-sponsored terrorism and aggression, and that any country without nuclear deterrence is vulnerable to exactly what Iran is experiencing right now. That statement should be read as more than North Korean propaganda. It is a message to every mid-sized country in the world that has considered whether to pursue nuclear capability. The implicit lesson Kim is drawing and broadcasting is simple. If Iran had a deliverable nuclear weapon, this war would not have started. That argument, made publicly at this moment, will be heard in Riyadh, Ankara, Cairo, and Seoul. The proliferation consequences of this conflict, how other states revise their security calculus in response to what they are watching happen to Iran, may ultimately be more consequential than the war's immediate military outcome. Republicans in Congress, meanwhile, again rejected a resolution on Tuesday that would have required Trump to seek congressional approval before taking future military action against Iran. The vote continues a pattern. Congressional Republicans have consistently refused to assert any oversight role over the war's conduct or escalation. That removes one of the few institutional checks on unilateral executive decision-making in a conflict that is now costing an estimated $890 million per day, according to CNN analysts, and has already exceeded $18 billion in direct costs as of March 19th. Let me close with the one thread that ties all of today's developments together. The 5-day diplomatic window Trump announced on March 23rd, the pause on striking Iranian power plants, expires in 2 days. Pakistan has delivered the U.S. terms. Iran is reviewing them. Iran's military spokesperson says there are no negotiations and the war will continue. Iran's diplomatic track, as relayed through intermediaries, suggests Tehran will listen if the terms are sustainable. The Israeli military says it needs several more weeks to complete its war aims and is not part of whatever the U.S. is negotiating. And Trump is simultaneously deploying the 82nd Airborne, claiming the war is essentially won, praising his defense secretary for not wanting peace, and reposting Pakistani ceasefire offers on social media. These are not the communications of an administration that has a coherent endgame. They are the communications of an administration managing contradictory pressures, domestic energy prices, Wall Street volatility, Israel's independent military agenda, Pentagon warfighting doctrine, and diplomatic mediation efforts, all simultaneously, with no unified strategy connecting them. Iran understands this, and Iran is patient. The next 48 hours will tell us whether the diplomatic window produces anything tangible, or whether the 5-day pause simply expires and Trump faces the same choice he faced on March 21st, escalate into Iranian civilian infrastructure and risk complete Gulf closure, or back down again and absorb the political cost of another unfulfilled ultimatum. Either path has consequences, and neither one ends this war. There is one more thing worth saying directly about what today reveals structurally. The Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez addressed Spain's Congress on Wednesday and described the U.S.-Israel campaign as an unjust and illegal war that has undermined international law, destabilized the Middle East, and reignited conflicts in Iraq and Lebanon. Spain is a NATO member. That a NATO ally is publicly using that language about an ongoing American military operation in a parliamentary address on day 26 tells you that the political cost of this war in terms of American alliance credibility is already accumulating in ways that will outlast whatever military outcome eventually arrives. The UK has not participated militarily, but allowed the US to use British bases for strikes. Prime Minister Keir Starmer called for an emergency meeting of economic advisors as fallout from the war mounts domestically. Canada condemned Israel's plans to occupy southern Lebanon. Australia suspended Iranian tourist visas. The European Commission president called for an immediate return to negotiations. These are not marginal responses. These are allied governments signaling to Washington that the war's collateral damage, economic, diplomatic, legal, is reaching levels they cannot quietly absorb. And yet, the war continues. The bombs fall. The missiles fly. Pakistan is waiting for Iran's answer. Trump is watching the 5-day clock, and the 82nd Airborne is packing. That is where we are on day 26. I will see you in the next one.